also, I wanted to let you know there is a Q&A section of this Zoom webinar. So if you have any questions, please do put them in the Q&A section. And at the end of Bernadette's talk, we will go through those questions with her, and I will facilitate that. So again, but you can put in that question at any time during this webinar session. So again, put your questions in that Q&A section of the Zoom webinar, and we'll go over them at the end. Yeah, but you can put them in at any time during the talk. So we will be keeping track of them basically. So thank you so much for coming. So I'm going to introduce Bernadette Rigley. She is a doctoral research fellow at Smithsonian's Working Landscapes and a PhD candidate at George Mason University. It's kind of fun. We both come from the same PhD lab under Dr. David Luther, and we're both big bird nerds. So it's really fun, good connection between Virginia Working Landscapes and Wild Virginia. And she's going to be talking to us about Virginia Working Landscapes, which is a program kind of off of the Smithsonian's Conservation Biology Institute, and they promote conservation of native biodiversity and sustainable land use through research, education, and community engagement. So really amazing work that they do. And it connects with Wild Virginia's work because we do a lot of work with habitat connectivity. That is my job title. And a large part of what Virginia Working Landscape does is to work with landowners and how to better manage their land, give them tips, and then research the biodiversity on their land so we can create more connected habitat corridors, things like this. And this is really connected to Wild Virginia's work because we are big fans of these wildlife corridors. They keep animals and wildlife away from roads, and they just really increase that biodiversity. So we're going to hear some really amazing research from Bernadette. We're going to learn more about where they're working in Virginia and all that good stuff. And at the end of this webinar, we are going to send you a follow-up email. We'll send you all the information from Virginia Working Landscapes and also the link to this video. So without further ado, Bernadette, you can take it away. And again, just as a reminder to our attendees, if you have a question at any time during her talk, please put it in that Q&A. We'll keep track of it and we'll discuss it at the end. So take it away, Bernadette. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to share some of the research that I'm doing with Virginia Working Landscapes, and just get my screen up and going. Okay. Let me just move this out of the way so I can see you all. Okay, can you see the screen all right? Okay, great. Well, again, thanks for having me. I want to start off the presentation today with a bird eye view of Virginia countryside, where a lot of my work is rooted. So it's taken by one of my favorite local conservation photographers, Hugh Kenny. And this Virginia landscape is made up of lush rolling hills dotted with cattle, hayfields, orchards, vineyards. And we have dense forests that stretch up to Shenandoah National Park and winding country roads that weave through the scenery. We have mountain springs that flow through the countryside and eventually empty out into the Chesapeake Bay. It's an absolutely breathtaking landscape. And within this landscape falls countless species that I could never have the space for on one slide, but many which are in steep decline. So we're really lucky to share this landscape with these species, yet we often overlook how deeply interconnected we are with them. So the way we manage our landscape influences all the species within it. The way we manage our edge habitat impacts the movements of bobwhite quail and bobcats. The pesticides we use on our fruit trees impact our bumblebees. The way we disturb our wetlands impacts the purple fringillous orchid. And the intensity of row cropping impacts the nesting success of American kestrels. And it's not just single species that are threatened, it's entire ecosystems. So while the Virginia countryside is layered in grasslands, the majority are comprised of non-native grasses. So in North America, our native grasslands have declined by as much as 99%, making them the most endangered ecosystem on the continent. As such, the potential for species extinction on grasslands is of serious concern. In fact, about 1/3 of North American species considered endangered are found on grasslands. So for example, it's been widely publicized that we're experiencing what the media is calling an insect apocalypse. So a recent study published in the Biological Conservation Journal, researchers studying grassland insects found a 67% decline in insect mass. This was just over a 10-year period. Our soils are also under pressure. Agricultural erosion surpasses the soil's capacity to recover, which threatens vital resources for future generations. The alteration of running waters and the depletion of aquifers and the increase of chemical pollutants also threatens our grasslands and their soils. And since grasslands are superior carbon sinks compared to forests, compromising our soils can also have significant impacts on our planet. An analysis led by the Xerces Society also indicated that more than 1/4 of North American bumblebees are facing some degree of extinction risk. And while we've just learned that we've lost nearly 3 billion birds through a recent study in Science, this was since 1970, the report emphasized that grassland birds have taken the hardest hit. So more than 700 million breeding grassland birds have been lost across 31 species, and this is just over the last 50 years. So just to give an example of some of the species that we find, at least here in our region of eastern grasslands, one would be the bobolink. So for every 5 bobolinks that we had in the 1970s, we now have just 2. So this is a species that I'm really fortunate enough to see through some of my grassland bird work. Again, they're pretty rare in Virginia, but we feel really, really lucky when we get to see and hear them. So research attributes the decline of grassland species with degradation and loss of habitat through land use changes such as agricultural intensification, pesticide use, invasive species, and development. And these are all intensified by broad-scale threats such as climate change. So our grasslands are the most endangered, the most altered, but they're also the least protected biome on the planet. Only about 3.4% of the world's temperate grasslands are actually under protection. So where do we start? Well, if you take a look at the US, you will see that the private lands of the US take up about 71% of just the lower 48 states. 2/3 of our nation's grasslands are also privately held, and 80% of endangered species habitats also reside on private lands. And so if you think of this from a species perspective, our grassland birds, for example, more than 80% of their distribution falls on private lands. So in order to successfully implement conservation of species and habitats on private lands, we really have to facilitate a model that works for both biodiversity as well as people. So as a result of this, a group of landowners collaborated with the Smithsonian, as well as some local NGOs in 2010 to create the Smithsonian's Virginia Working Landscapes Program, or VWL. And we're a research-based program that brings together scientists, landowners, community scientists, and regional partners to promote the conservation of native biodiversity and sustainable land management through scientific research, education, and community engagement. And although we're a program of the National Zoo and Conservation Biology Institute that is known for saving species and habitats all around the world, VWL really gives us a platform to bridge the extensive network of Smithsonian science with local knowledge and on-the-ground conservation implementation right here in our local community. So we currently collaborate with landowners and community scientists to conduct ecological research across a 16-county region surrounding the Front Royal campus and Shenandoah National Park. This is a region that's predominantly privately owned, and it provides us a really unique opportunity to better understand how management of working lands impacts native biodiversity, and also allows us to integrate the knowledge and experience of local partners as we build research and conservation programs. So from just 12 properties in 2010 to over 250 properties today, our survey efforts have covered nearly 90,000 acres of private lands in just the last decade. So the majority of our research, again, is focused on grasslands, which come in a variety of shapes, sizes, and land uses here in Virginia. These include things like livestock pastures. We also have hay fields, fallow post-agricultural fields, and wildlife preserves. And our research includes our foundational biodiversity surveys that have been ongoing since 2010. These include surveys of birds, plants, and pollinators. And with the help of more than 150 community scientists, we're able to conduct these surveys on private lands to give us a better understanding of how our management of grasslands is impacting our native species. So these biodiversity surveys enable us to develop focal projects based on emerging questions. And additionally, we also collaborate closely with partners who utilize our extensive network of private lands to address their research questions. And as a research fellow, I help to lead several of our focal projects. So my research is primarily centered on the ecology of grassland birds that utilize these working lands. And my main goal of my dissertation is to identify management practices that can benefit both our grassland birds as well as people. So I want to switch gears a bit and delve deeper into the specifics of my research. So in 2020, I joined VWL to help develop and lead our bird-friendly beef study, which is a collaboration with our partners at the American Farmland Trust. And our goal here is to explore how regenerative grazing and hang regimes influence the reproductive success of our grassland bird communities. And before I move on, I just want to define regenerative agriculture. I think it's a term that's been popularized in recent years, but its principles have deep roots in Indigenous knowledge systems and traditional land management practices. So regenerative grazing and hang is a holistic land management approach used by cattle producers to restore soil and pasture health. It's typically characterized by reduced reliance on hay harvesting and a greater emphasis that's placed on rotational grazing techniques that kind of mirror the behavior of traditional bison herds. So as I mentioned earlier, we have very few native grasslands remaining in Virginia. So our surrogate grasslands in the form of these hayfields and pasture lands have really become valuable habitats for our nesting grassland birds. However, these working lands have deteriorated in their ability to support populations. Many of our grassland birds, they nest directly on the ground, which makes them especially vulnerable to disturbance from hay harvesting and cattle grazing practices. So earlier and more frequent hay cuttings often don't provide sufficient time for birds to complete their nesting cycle. In fact, a single hay harvest can kill 100% of active nests in a field. In addition, high cattle stocking rates can lead to a lot of disturbance and can create unsuitable habitat for our nesting birds. So we've been working with several local cattle producers to co-develop and establish experimental treatments on Virginia farms. This includes 2 grazing treatments represented on the left side of the figure and 2 hay cutting treatments shown on the right. And this study design enabled us to test experimental treatments aimed at striking a balance between both the needs of birds as well as supporting production on these lands. Within all of our treatments, we monitor the breeding activity of nesting grassland bird communities. So this included obligate grassland birds such as the eastern meadowlark, our bobolink that I mentioned earlier, grasshopper sparrows, and savanna sparrows. These species are all highly dependent on grassland habitats for nesting, foraging, and breeding. They're found nowhere else. We also collected data on red-winged blackbirds, which are referred to as a facultative grassland species. So they'll use grasslands for nesting, but they're not dependent on those habitats. And over the last 4 years, we've collected data from 800 grassland bird nests. It's been a really remarkable effort made possible by our dedicated team of summer interns and many landowners and managers who've participated in this research. And I just want to give you all a bird's eye view of what some of these nests look like. So this is an eastern meadowlark nest, which is like this dome-like structure made from grasses and other plant material. The female constructs it entirely on her own, and she'll incubate her eggs for about 12 days. Once hatched, the nestlings remain in the nest for about another 12 days before leaving. They're incredibly well camouflaged and difficult to find. And hopefully this video works. So here we can see the female bringing, I don't know what that is, something, something delicious, bringing food to her young. So from our preliminary data, we've identified two best management practices to support nesting grassland birds. The first is summer stockpiling. So this is characterized by cattle grazing fields early until about May 15th. Cattle are then rotated off those pastures and the vegetation is allowed to regrow to support wildlife habitat and to be used as forage later in the year. So this practice not only allows for high rates of reproductive success among our grassland birds, but it also results in standing forage that's suitable for a variety of different livestock classes. Meaning cattle producers can graze these fields in late summer or fall, and by doing so, it decreases their reliance on having to make hay. And then the second is delayed hay cutting. As I mentioned before, our hay fields can often act as population sinks, meaning if they're harvested during peak nesting season, birds just don't have enough time to raise their young, and it can lead to persistent population declines. So determining when birds finish breeding can help guide the timing of haying to promote their population recovery. And we've identified that by delaying your hay cutting till July 1st, this increases the possibility of fledging by 80%. So therefore, by postponing hay cutting by several weeks, you're providing sufficient time for our nesting birds to raise their young. Now, our bird-friendly beef research also led us to ask some questions about the impact of farm management on birds during the weeks after leaving the nest, or what is known as the post-fledging period. So during this time, young birds are gaining independence from their parents. They're learning to fly, developing foraging skills, avoiding predators, and coping with the environment around them. So this photo is actually taken on one of the farms where I conduct research, and it shows a recently fledged red-winged blackbird. This juvenile bird managed to fledge its nest and escape the tractor and hay harvest. But you can see without adequate cover from potential predators, just how vulnerable birds might be at this time. So this led us to start our project Fledgling in 2022, which is a collaboration with the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, the Smithsonian Mason School of Conservation, and the Smithsonian's Movement of Life Initiative. And here we're examining the survival, movements, and habitat use of juvenile grassland birds. So again, we know that our grassland birds are declining, but to understand where that bottleneck is occurring in a bird's life and what factors might contribute to population declines, we need to assess habitat quality at all life stages. So we've been collecting data on reproductive output and nest survival, again, through our bird-friendly beef research. And there are nationwide efforts to understand adult survival, but we know very, very little about birds during that juvenile stage. So again, from the time they leave the nest to the time where they're gaining independence from their parents. So to address our questions, we've been harnessing the power of the MODIS Wildlife Tracking System, or MODIS. And I just want to pause and chat here about MODIS because it's such a cool collaborative effort. MODIS utilizes a network of towers that are strategically placed across the country and around the world. These towers are equipped with special antennas that can detect signals emitted by radio transmitters that are attached to animals. So when an animal with a transmitter passes within range of one of these towers, the tower picks up the signal and records the animal's presence. And by having multiple towers in different locations, researchers can track the movement of animals over vast distances and across various habitats. So this tower-based system allows for a really comprehensive monitoring of wildlife migration patterns and behaviors on a large scale. And scientists are using MODIS to track birds, bats, and even invertebrates like the monarch butterfly. So we set up a MODIS tower on a farm in Warren County. And in addition to the MODIS tower, we also set up an array of automated receiving nodes represented by the pink dots on the map. So these automated receiving nodes act like little mini MODIS towers by picking up the signals of radio transmitters that are attached to birds within our study site. So when a bird with a tracking device flies within range of one of these nodes, it sends a signal to the main tower. And by analyzing the signals from multiple nodes, we can actually map out the bird's movement across the farm in fine detail. So by using MODIS, we can monitor both their movements locally across the farm and potentially detect any large-scale movements by tapping into the global network of towers. The farm where we're conducting this research also has a mosaic of habitat types. They have restored native meadows, forest, a variety of different hay types, crops, as well as cattle and horse pasture. So it makes a really suitable study area for exploring how juvenile grassland birds utilize and interact with working landscapes. And then we chose 3 species that represent our bird communities using these habitats. The American kestrel pictured on the left, they use grasslands to hunt. And then we chose, again, our 2 grassland obligate species, which I've mentioned before, our eastern meadowlark on the upper right. It is both a resident and short distance migrant here in Virginia, and the bobolink, which is a long distance migrant. And then we captured birds just before they're about to leave their nest and equipped them with small tracking devices. So these devices are worn like little backpacks with the transmitter sitting on the bird's back, as you can picture, as pictured here. We have the American kestrel in the upper right and a juvenile eastern meadowlark on the left. And using our MODIS tower and our network of nodes, we're able to measure their survival rates and follow their movements across the farm. So what we're finding is that survival during a 40-day post-fledging period for our 3 species ranges from 27% to 94%. So looking at this graph, we have survival probability on the y-axis and days post-fledging. So that's how many days after they've left the nest on the x-axis. And we can see that survival is pretty different among our 3 species. Throughout the entire study, we only had 1 kestrel mortality. And this finding was expected. They have a high degree of parental care. They spend about a month in the nest, and when they fledge, they can take sustained flight. So we expected them to exhibit high survival after leaving their nest. Meadowlarks and bobolinks had relatively similar survival after fledging. And what we see here is this pattern of high mortality immediately after leaving the nest. And then mortality sort of tapers off and decreases with age. Now, meadowlarks and bobolinks are pretty helpless when they leave the nest, actually. They fledge at just 11 days old, and they're basically stumbling around on the ground. They aren't even able to take flight, like sustained flight, for another week. So during this really early post-fledging period, they spend all of their time on the ground. So we expected to see high mortality, right? They're really susceptible to environmental conditions, predators, and land management like hay cutting activities. So once more, I want to offer you a bird's eye view of the same nest I showed before. And here we have an eastern meadowlark actually fledging the nest. And you'll see that rather than the bird flying, it just sort of walks out of the nest and begins to explore its surroundings. And the bird will spend most of its time on the ground, especially, again, during those first couple weeks as they become independent from their parents. Got some long legs. But around 20 days and older for our meadowlarks and bobolinks, they can take sustained flight. So we were a bit surprised to document several mortalities of these older juveniles from impact with farm machinery. So again, this finding was somewhat unexpected because despite their flying capabilities, they just seemed to wait last minute to take flight, leaving them insufficient time to avoid oncoming tractors. So one simple practice that might help to mitigate this is a flushing bar. And what that is essentially a bar, or sometimes folks use chains, and it's attached to the tractor and positioned ahead of the haying implement. And what it does is it's designed to create disturbance ahead of the tractor and provide additional time for birds to move out of the way and avoid potential injury or mortality. Now, through this research, we're also gathering really valuable data on how young birds interact with a diverse mix of land use types. These plots here depict habitat utilization at 25 days post-fledging for an American kestrel on the left and a bobolink on the right. And these maps represent just a 24-hour period. So orange represents habitat utilization during the day, and blue is for night. The main takeaway here is that we're finding that our grassland birds are using these lands in a variety of ways. For example, American kestrels spend a lot of their time hunting along tree lines and fence lines that are adjacent to hay fields with relatively short grass. On the other hand, our bobolink prefer to utilize uncut hay fields with really, really dense vegetation structure. And we've even documented them roosting at night in a restored native warm season meadow. So we still have plenty of data analysis ahead of us, but our primary goal here is to understand how farm management practices impact both their habitat use and survival, so we can identify practices that safeguard them during this really vulnerable period. And besides monitoring our birds locally on the farm, we've also detected long distance movements by tapping into the MODIS network. So this map here illustrates the estimated movements of 3 juvenile American kestrels that were tagged right here in Virginia. 2 of them made their way down to southern Florida, and another one all the way down to South Carolina. So pretty cool to see this. But we're really excited that by using this MODIS technology, hopefully we can capture more large-scale movements like this. And in addition, our tower that we set up on the farm has been detecting birds involved in other projects. So this really allows us to contribute to broader data collection efforts as well. So what are we doing with all this data? Well, we want to make sure that we're using it to help make recommendations and improve best management practices for biodiversity. So utilizing insights, again, from our research as well as existing literature, we're able to create resources for producers and landowners who are interested in incorporating bird-friendly practices into their management regimes. And this resource, for example, includes a field management risk calendar that we created, and we update every year as new information becomes available. It tells you the riskiest time for managing fields as it relates to the nesting season. And it also offers advice on management of habitat for wintering bird communities. So you can download this as well as other resources on our website. Now, our grassland bird research has also led to the launch of a new initiative to help spread awareness about grassland birds in our region. So aside from research, our goal is also to collaborate with regional partners and to help translate research into actual conservation action. So we created the Virginia Grassland Bird Initiative, or VGBI, in 2021 in collaboration with the Piedmont Environmental Council, the American Farmland Trust, and Quail Forever. And this collaboration is led by my colleague, Justin Proctor. With these 4 core partners, we're able to combine expertise in research, land conservation, regenerative agriculture, advocacy, and habitat restoration to collaboratively stem the tide of grassland bird decline and improve the resiliency of working landscapes. So having such a diverse set of expertise at the table creates a great space for sharing information and creating new ways to engage with audiences that we wouldn't otherwise have access to without these partners. And one of VGBI's most successful programs to date is the creation of an in-house incentive program that can pay farmers to either try out 2 of our best management practices that we identified through our research. So that's that delayed hay cutting or summer pasture stockpiling. So this allows producers to test out these practices, determine if they align with their production goals, while not having to worry about the financial risk of trying something new. And the response to this program has been excellent. Since 2022, we have enrolled more than 46 farms across 11 counties into that delayed hay or summer pasture stockpiling scenario. We had 2,968 acres officially enrolled in the program, with an additional 2,000 plus acres enrolled voluntarily. Now, as a result of the success of this program, we've been working more closely with our state conservation offices, so the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS. And some of you might already be familiar with NRCS. They support landowners by visiting properties, offering management consultations, and connecting you with state funding opportunities to adopt conservation practices. So we've utilized our incentive program to help adjust NRCS cost share initiatives to include practices, again, that were identified through our research that better align with production while still supporting grassland bird conservation. So as a result, state funding is now available through EQIP 511, which is the forage and harvest management program, and EQIP 528, which pertains to grazing. So these programs will financially support farmers who adopt, again, that delayed hay cutting or summer stockpiling practice. So if you're interested in this, feel free to reach out to myself or your local NRCS extension agent. And I think it's just been incredibly rewarding to observe the positive effects of these practices. Over the past 5 years of conducting research, I've actually been able to witness populations of bobolink flourish, and they've even begun to spread onto neighboring farms. So watching these birds thrive and expand their habitat is a real testament to the effectiveness of these bird-friendly practices that farms have been adopting. So it's important to produce sound science, but it's also important to involve the community in that science in a way that can ultimately drive change. So I just want to talk about some simple steps that we all can take to protect both our migratory and resident birds. So for one, we can plant native plants. A recent study of chickadees showed that an urban yard needs to consist of at least 70% native plants to sustain a stable population. Native plants are essential for providing the insects that breeding birds need to feed themselves and their young. So I encourage you all to take an inventory of the plant species currently in your yard and replace those non-natives with native ones. And along those lines, we also want to make sure that we can reduce, or even better yet, eliminate pesticides, so we can allow the bugs to flourish and feed the food chain. You can also take it one step further by adding nest boxes or water features to your yard to provide additional resources. And there's so many different species that use boxes, like chickadees, house wrens, bluebirds, tree swallows, purple martins, American kestrels. All of these species are really important insect eaters, so they can help control agricultural pests as well. But please don't attract birds to your yard in this way if you have outdoor cats. Cats are the second leading human cause factor in bird deaths after habitat loss. So keeping cats indoors not only safeguards bird populations, but it also ensures the safety and well-being of our pets by minimizing their exposure to dangers such as traffic, predator, and diseases. Another simple step you can take is to reduce or shut off outdoor lighting, especially during migration season. As migrating birds pass through our neighborhoods and cities, they can become disoriented by bright artificial lights and sky glow, often causing them to collide with buildings or windows. So it's estimated that 600 million birds die annually due to collisions with buildings and structures, with a large number of those occurring at residential buildings. So just by turning off unnecessary lights, closing your blinds at night to minimize light emitting from your windows. You can also use lighting shields on outdoor fixtures that direct your light downward. These are all ways we can help protect our migrating birds. And also drink bird-friendly coffee. Traditional coffee farms often destroy rainforests to grow coffee in full sun. So Smithsonian scientists have actually been working with coffee farmers in Central and South America for over a decade to develop the gold standard really for bird-friendly coffee. Instead of clearing rainforests, bird-friendly coffee is grown underneath shade trees that provide habitat for birds, including migratory species who spend their summers right here in Virginia. And then just last year, Smithsonian has also branched into something a little bit more sweet, bird-friendly cocoa, and it's very delicious, I might add. I highly suggest that you check out the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center's bird-friendly website, and you can learn more about where you can find both bird-friendly coffee and cocoa products. You can also support your local farmers who practice sustainable agriculture. So these farmers often create habitats for native biodiversity, and their sustainable practices help maintain healthy ecosystems. So stay informed on the conservation practices being implemented around your community, and support those who nurture a conservation ethic into their daily work. And you can empower yourself with knowledge. By learning about local ecosystems and species, you can be better equipped with the understanding needed to make informed decisions that support our native wildlife. So for example, VWL publishes a monthly newsletter featuring insights from recently published research, as well as a conservation tip of the month. And there are also many apps available that can help you identify the plants and wildlife in your own backyards. So apps like iNaturalist allow you to learn while contributing to community science. And one of my favorites is the Merlin Bird ID app from Cornell Lab of Ornithology. It's so fun. It helps you identify all the birds in your vicinity by tuning into the bird songs around you. So it's a really fantastic tool for learning bird identification through their songs. And as you educate yourself on current conservation practices and species habitat needs, share what you learned with your neighbors. And there are many ways to do this. But as an example, a lot of our landowners that we work with host nature walks just for fun. They invite their neighbors over to explore new habitat projects that they've undertaken. These walks allow everyone to exchange information, and landowners often end up taking that information and applying it to their own properties. So it's amazing how much of an impact you can have by sharing a little knowledge, and it's a great opportunity to discuss both challenges and successes. And of course, a lot of what Wild Virginia focuses on is improving habitat connectivity. I think it can be a bit overwhelming sometimes to think about how much space some of our wildlife needs. For example, research has shown that bobwhite quail need up to 5,000 acres of connected habitat. But you don't have to do it all on your own, right? Our landscape is made up of a mosaic of landowners who care about these species. So connect with your neighbors and build projects together. I think by doing so, we can collectively make a significant impact on enhancing habitat connectivity. And then finally, consider backing your local conservation organization. So all of my research and everything that we do through VWL is supported entirely by grants, foundations, individual contributions, and community support. So I encourage you to support your local conservation organization if you have the capacity to do so. It can make a significant difference in the ability for many organizations to continue the vital work that they do in safeguarding biodiversity and ecosystems. So you might not be able to adopt all of the things I suggested, but even adopting just one will go a long way. So as a conservation community, I think we need to be more adaptive and strategic in managing our landscape in a way to bring back these species and maintain the integrity of our ecosystems. So if you're keen on staying informed about our ongoing efforts, I suggest you subscribe to our monthly newsletter. Here we highlight recent advances in conservation science that are compiled entirely by our team of interns, fellows, and students. They summarize recently published scientific articles that are really relevant to conservation work in this region. And then additionally, as I mentioned before, we include updates on projects, upcoming events, and offer valuable conservation tips each month. Yeah, and I really also just want to take a moment to recognize that all of my research and the work that we do is only made possible through a collective effort. So I do want to thank all of the landowners and cattle producers who've made all of this research possible. A huge appreciation goes out to those who support the VWL Fellowship Program and our research endeavors. A big thank you to all of our funding and project partners. And of course, our dedicated team of interns who set their alarms for 4 a.m. to get up with the birds. Their enthusiasm and hard work, I think, have really been the backbone of this research. So many people to thank. Again, a huge collaborative effort here. And if you'd like to reach out, my email is there as well as our general inbox. If you have any questions about our program or the Virginia Grassland Bird Initiative, again, feel free to reach out. And you can also find a lot more information and resources on our website. So that is all I have for you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Bernadette. That was really incredible and wonderful and so informative. And I love all the images and the videos. That was really great.
Yeah,
We already do have a bunch of questions, so let me go through them.
sure.
Um, so our first one is when determining how much grassland has been lost historically, what year or time period that you are using as the original baseline? So do you have like what's the benchmark that it goes back to?
Yeah, it's actually it's hard, right, to have a baseline of exactly what was the extent of grasslands, right? Because um, a lot of our land changed with European colonization, and a lot of our baselines were from that time frame. But we have really great information from remnant prairies, pollen deposits, a lot of early historical records that a lot of great people are working to sort of put together to sort of figure out where grasslands existed, right? I think even when we talk about grasslands in the southeast, I think we often even think that what like right this area is forested, grasslands didn't exist here. But we're learning more and more that actually they were present and they were pretty extensive, especially along the coastal plains regions and throughout the Piedmont. Great question. I think we're still like there's not a really great baseline. We're piecing information together to really describe just how extensive grasslands were.
Makes sense. Thank you. Okay.
Hmm.
And then, so we have two questions that kind of go together.
Sure.
So one is saying that they have an 8-acre field that their neighbor will cut for hay for his cattle. Should we be leaving it alone until July 15th? And then we have another landscape manager for a 550-acre property in Southeast Virginia. They're in the process of developing a 1-acre native meadow project. And the similar question, what time of year slash height is appropriate for mowing for native meadow to support birds and insects? So same kind of question. Should we leave it alone till July 15th? Birds and insects kind of a question.
Yeah. I mean, I think if you can, if delaying your hay cutting can support your production goals as well, I think it's a great way, again, to support our grassland birds during that peak nesting period. So if you do have the ability to delay till July 1st or even later, I mean, that's wonderful. Our grassland birds will appreciate you.
Yeah.
For our native meadows, I guess the question was timing of management on native meadows.
Yeah, so
So,
they're in the process of developing 1-acre pilot native meadow project on our
oh,
property.
yeah, that's excellent. Best of luck with that project. That sounds really awesome. So, our native meadows and a lot of our warm season grasses and forbs can actually offer a lot of protection and habitat for our overwintering birds. I think we often think about grasslands during the breeding season and how we can support our breeding birds, but it's also really important habitat for overwintering birds. So again, you can check out some of those resources that I mentioned online, but one recommendation that we give is to cut those in like February to April, right? So early spring, that way you have standing forage or standing vegetation over the winter to support your wintering birds. Or if you do cut it in, say, summer, cut it early enough that you allow enough regrowth. So again, you have some habitat, to support your overwintering birds. Great question, though.
Yeah, really great questions. Love seeing the landowners here. This is really great. So let's see here. The next one, does Virginia Working Landscape conduct research on grazing practices for birds in warm season pastures?
Yeah, that's a great question. We actually don't. There's some great work out of University of Tennessee being conducted by Pat Kaiser. They do a lot of work on warm season grasses, and I would say their main focus is looking at how to integrate those into forage and cattle systems. So yeah, I would say here we don't often see a lot of our grassland birds actually using our native warm season meadows. Well, first of all, there's not many around, but those that are often restored native meadows, and they tend to be really dense and thick. And so I don't think it really provides an opportunity for our grassland birds to actually nest there. Perhaps if they were grazed or managed slightly differently, we might see our grassland birds utilizing those more, or at least our obligate grassland birds. But yeah, I would recommend to check out some of Pat Kaiser's work. Again, they're doing some really cool work in showing just how profitable warm season grasses can be as a forage system.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, and this next one, love a reintroduction question. Is any organization gathering the fledged meadowlarks and bobolinks to raise them somewhat to an older age and then release? Have you heard of any sort of projects like this?
No, I haven't. Not for meadowlarks and bobolink. I think the real focus is on how can we shift our management regimes to better support them during that time.
Yeah,
So that's really our focus.
that makes sense. Yeah. Great question, though. I think
Mhm.
that's important. And I really liked the idea of the bar in front of the tractor. I think that's interesting.
Yeah,
Never heard of that. I thought that was great.
yeah, and it's pretty simple, right? It's something they can attach to the tractor. It's not a lot of effort, and hopefully it could you know help give not only birds but even things like fawns and other things that are using these fields and often unfortunately get run over by tractors and farm equipment.
That makes sense. Okay, we have another one. Should you plant native shrubs or small trees in or adjacent to grassland landscape for perching or cover? Are there any particular species of native shrub or trees that you recommend?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't have any great recommendations on native plants. I mean, or native shrubs. I would say my go-to is always the oak. Oaks, I think, are so great. There's been research that has shown, I forgot how many species an oak can support, but it's one of the best trees, native trees that you can plant. But also diversifying your farm, right? So if you have areas where you can plant shrubs for some of those sort of shrubland or edge habitat species. That's a great thing to do. But we also want to make sure that we're keeping our grasslands open, right? A lot of our obligate grassland birds, they rely on contiguous open habitat. For example, I think meadowlarks, you need at least 25 or 20 acres usually of contiguous open grasslands. So if we can keep those things open as well as diversifying your farms, I think is the best practice.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mhm.
And the Virginia Working Landscape, you guys have a ton of resources. So we will link those resources in our
Yeah.
follow-up email for you guys from Virginia Working Landscapes. Okay, awesome. Um, Next one, let's see here. I love that farmers are so receptive to these practices. It makes sense that they are so connected to the land. Have you found that farmers continually increase their involvement by putting up birdhouses, creating buffer zones, etc.? And have you found that farmers share their knowledge and practices with other farmers?
Yeah, I would absolutely. I would say that's actually one of the most rewarding things about working with Virginia Working Landscapes, especially as a PhD student. I think a lot of folks don't get to see sort of the impact of their research. And one of the most rewarding things is going out with landowners and seeing again, they put up a kestrel box and oh my goodness, there's kestrels in there, and their bluebird boxes have bluebirds nesting in them. I think they get really excited, and yeah, it's been really fun to watch too. Sort of that peer-to-peer exchange of knowledge, right? They will try something out on their land. It seems to work. They get excited about it and share that with their neighbors. Or often we host events too, just to sort of facilitate those knowledge exchanges. And so I think we have a really great community that is excited about being stewards of our land.
Awesome. Thank you. So this one's a little bit more intense, and you may have information on this. We have a little bit information on this, but have any of your study sites applied biosolids in the past or currently apply biosolids? Have soil or biosolids at the study site been tested for PFAS and other chemical concerns? Study of effect on these biosolids, PFAS on grassland birds.
Yeah, I don't know of well, I don't work with any farmers applying biosolids, and I know I think I've seen some signs around actually in Virginia, but not any farms that I personally work with, as well as PFAS. I mean, I'm very interested in learning about how some of these pollutants can actually impact our grassland birds, right? We actually have been collaborating with the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center on a meadowlark project. We're looking not only at their migration, but we've been collecting feather samples to look at potential pollutants that might be present in their feathers. So it's something that I think we're all really interested in, but we're just starting to learn more about.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. Yeah, and for I think it's Barbara Walsh who submitted that question, we just had a webinar on PFAS effects on wildlife and research going on with that, which a lot of it was on birds. So if you would like to check out that webinar, is on Wild Virginia's YouTube channel. We also have a info sheet on that. So, but really interesting that this is potentially happening for grassland birds too. That's great. Okay. Let's see, just gonna check the time. Okay, we got some time. Okay. Dave says, along with the Manassas National Battlefield Park's western border, there is a proposed 2,100 acre data center complex. Right now, the land is under development. Threat, they're rolling pastures, lots of home sites, field hay sites. If the data centers are built and the rural landscape is lost, what happens to the grassland birds? Are they able to migrate to other ever diminishing land, or will they be additional casualties and habitat loss?
That's a really good question. And I actually don't know about this proposed development. So thanks for sharing that. And I'm interested to learn more. But yeah, I mean, I guess we don't know, right? I mean, I think our best guess is that a lot of birds will move into other habitats that are nearby. So as long as there's sort of refugia and available habitat nearby, I think they can move into those areas. But without that, yeah, I mean, it could potentially, right? Habitat loss is leading to population decline. So
Yeah, that is a bummer. I
yeah,
I used to do research in Manassas National
yeah,
Battle Park on grassland birds. So yeah, so hopefully maybe they move into that park. That would be
yeah.
yeah. Okay, and let's see the next one. Peter asks, if kestrel fledgling mortality is so low, why is the species seemingly declining in other parts of the country or certain parts of the country?
Yeah, that's also a really great question. So our collaborators at the Smithsonian Conservation Mason School, they're leading that effort with American kestrels. And I think, again, there's not usually one reason why they're declining. It's usually a multitude of factors that are causing sort of this big impact. And again, we're sort of figuring things out, but I think there are a lot of things attributed to pollutants and rodenticides, also habitat loss. So again, just sort of a multitude of factors.
Yep, that's great. Thank you. Okay, so we have just we'll do two more and then the last question I can kind
Sure.
of get to. So what are your biggest invasive species issues that you see in your research on grassland birds? So it could be maybe plants or maybe animal.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you know, when I'm like the system that I work in, we're actually working in these non-native cool season grasses. So they're full of non-natives. I guess we could see some invasives come in, but these birds are pretty well adapted to non-native cool season grasses. We see just in general on our farms, a lot of birds like starlings. I know some farms we have issues with house sparrows that overtake bluebird boxes. So I would say those are probably our biggest invasive species on our farmlands. But it's interesting that our grassland birds have become pretty well adapted to these non-native cool season meadows and pastures.
Yeah. Yeah, great question. Okay. Are commercial scale solar power arrays a possible site for grassland birds? What design, planting, or other aspects should be considered? Interesting.
Yeah, that's also a great question. It's something that Virginia Working Landscapes has actually been really interested in learning more about. We are, I think, bringing on a research fellow this year to actually look at solar and in its impacts on, grassland biodiversity. So I think it's, again, something that we're still not quite sure about. I, I think, we can do a lot to support our native pollinators in those, massive solar arrays. But my sort of hypothesis is that our grassland birds, right, they're probably not going to be utilizing those vast solar arrays for nesting habitat. Again, they really want that contiguous grassland habitat.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay, and then so the last one, kind of connecting it back. Thank you so much for this question. To the work we do at Wild Virginia. I'll let you answer this one first. Are there been any coordination between neighboring farms to create more contiguous wildlife corridors? And is this practical? Yes, no.
Yeah, I would say a lot of our landowner network, again, we facilitate a lot of conversations, a lot of events where people can come together and talk about, projects that they can work on together. So I think there's quite a bit of that. Yeah, it's again really wonderful to see. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good example, but a lot of, the farmers that I work with are really focused on, these best management practices for our grassland birds. So, by talking to their neighbors, for example, we've had bobolink sort of spreading and moving to neighboring farms, and those landowners are now talking to their neighbors about delaying their hay cutting or implementing summer stockpiling or other conservation practices, right, to safeguard those growing populations. So I think that's a lot of what I see, which is also incredibly rewarding to see that.
Yeah, incredible. I mean, just incredible work. We love it. Love to see it. And also at Wild Virginia, we do a lot of this work too. So if you want to get involved with more advocacy efforts or learn more about sort of like conservation easements and how that coincides with our Virginia Wildlife Corridor Action Plan, which where our lovely state agencies identified biodiversity resilience corridors, which overlays really wonderful with Virginia working landscapes work. So you can see where a lot of their work is on public and private lands kind of overlaps with a lot of those biodiversity resilience corridors, which is really amazing. And yeah, so I think that is the last question for today. Thank you so much to Bernadette. This was really just an incredible webinar. I mean, I learned so much, and I think our guests learned so much, and I'm really happy to see a lot of landowners here, and I hope you guys can join in this wonderful community. Does Virginia Working Landscapes, correct me if I'm wrong, do they have a place where landowners can potentially sign up to work with you guys?
Yes. So you can reach out to that email. I will put it in the chat as well. And you can get connected with our survey coordinator, Erin Shibley. She handles all of that. So if you are interested in participating as a landowner and having, it starts off with Erin sort of assessing your site and figuring out, what sort of research would be most appropriate given your farm. So I will put her, or I'll put the email in the chat here.
Perfect.
I can copy this. We're vaworkinglandscapes.org.
Awesome. Yes. And we'll include that also in our follow-up email, and really just any information, Virginia Working Landscapes website for everybody, and along with this recording and a bunch of other really cool resources that Bernadette mentioned. So I think that's it. Thank you so much to everyone for having really wonderful questions and joining today. And thank you again to Bernadette.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and thank you all for joining. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Yes, we'll send you a follow-up email, Bernadette. Thank you so much. This was
Yeah,
really wonderful.
thanks. Bye.
Bye, everyone.